So, guys, as the Commanders get closer to training camp, one position is not completely settled yet. We all know Terry McLaurin is the clear number one receiver, but the battle for that second outside spot is still wide open. And with Brandon Ayuk no longer part of the conversation, Washington's focus has shifted elsewhere. And, Washington has plenty of options within their roster, but right now they're relying more on potential than proven production. If the Commanders want to maximize Jayden Daniels' potential, they can't afford to leave that WR2 spot as a question mark. That's why one name has quietly started making a lot of sense. And the more you look at the bigger picture, the easier it is to see why. So let's talk about why Adam Peters may have just found the perfect weapon for Jayden Daniels. What's up, Commanders Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Commanders. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So, the name linked with the Commanders this time is Kayshon Boutte. And I know that name might not ring a bell for everyone right away, but stick with me because once you see the connection, it starts to make a whole lot of sense. Here's the thing. Kayshon Boutte and Jayden Daniels were actually teammates for one season at LSU back in 2022. And this wasn't just some random overlap on a roster either. They connected 48 times for 538 yards and 2 touchdowns that year. And honestly, if you go back and watch the tape, you can see the trust building between them play after play. That kind of history matters more than people realize, because chemistry between a quarterback and a receiver is not something you can just build overnight in an NFL training camp. It takes reps, it takes trust, and these two already have a foundation from their college days that most new additions simply do not have. Since then, Boutte has quietly turned himself into a legit vertical threat in the NFL. He was drafted in the 6th round back in 2023, and last season he averaged 7 yards per reception, which ranked among the best marks in the entire league. He caught 71% of the go route passes thrown his way, and 30% of his total targets came on go routes alone. So, we are talking about a true field stretcher here, a guy built to take the top off a defense the moment he gets a step. And in a league where explosive plays win games, that kind of skill set does not grow on trees. Teams spend high draft picks chasing exactly this kind of speed, and Boutte has already shown he can produce it at a discounted price. Now, why does that matter for Washington specifically? Well, we already know David Blough has talked about wanting to get Terry McLaurin 10 targets a game. And look, you are not doing that if Terry is stuck out wide on one side of the field every single snap. You need to be able to move him around, create favorable matchups, and honestly, that is exactly where a guy like Kayshon Boutte could help. About 49% of his snaps in New England came aligned wide left, and 7% of his outside non-slot snaps came on that left side too, so yeah, he's clearly comfortable there. But here's the part that really stands out to me. He is not just a one-side guy. Roughly 45% of his outside snaps have actually come from the right side of the formation. So there is real versatility built into his game, even if the slot work is limited. Less than 11% of his career snaps have come from inside, but that just means it has not been asked of him yet in New England, not that he cannot do it. And if David Blough wants to move pieces around to keep defenses guessing, having a receiver who can line up on either side without missing a beat only makes that job easier. Now, let's talk availability too, because that matters just as much as scheme fit. Kayshon Boutte skipped voluntary offseason workouts after the Patriots signed Romeo Doubs, and while they were also chasing a trade for A.J. Brown. But he did show up for mandatory minicamp, so this was never some full-blown holdout. He has been open with reporters that he is frustrated with his role and open to a fresh start somewhere else. That tells me this is a guy who wants to prove himself, not a guy who is checked out on football. And honestly, that kind of hunger is exactly what you want in a receiver who is fighting for a bigger role on a new team. So, what would this actually cost Washington? This is where it gets tricky because the price has actually gone up. Early in the offseason, most people were talking 5th or 6th round pick. But now, with Boutte coming off a season where the Patriots reached the Super Bowl and he set a career high with 6 touchdowns, New England is reportedly looking for closer to a 3rd round pick. That is a big jump, and honestly, it changes the whole conversation. If I am Adam Peters, I am not giving up a 3rd for a 1-year rental at receiver, not with this much risk in his profile. I would probably come back with a 4th round offer, maybe a conditional 5th that only becomes a 4th if he signs an extension in Washington. That keeps the deal fair without overpaying for a guy who has never been the focal point of an offense. New England might not love that number, but if the calls keep coming in at 5th round value, a 4th is still a strong deal for a receiver in a contract year. And it is worth saying clearly, this Patriots team is not rebuilding. They just came off a Super Bowl run, so they are not going to give away a piece of that roster for nothing. Any trade here happens on New England's terms, not Washington's. Now, I do want to slow down here for a second because this is not a slam dunk by any means. I have got some real hesitation, and I think it is worth walking through honestly. The biggest one is that Kayshon Boutte has basically been a one-trick pony in New England. His entire target profile screams vertical and nothing else. I am talking 33 targets at least 20 yards downfield, and 18 of those at least 30 yards downfield. 7 of his 9 career touchdowns have come from 20 yards or further out. That 30% go route rate we mentioned is a really heavy concentration for one route type. On top of that, he is near the bottom of the league in creating separation, and he does not do much after the catch either. His average depth of target sits at 15.84, and his yards per reception is 14.9. Those numbers being that close tells you he's basically not gaining anything extra once the ball is in his hands. Less than 20% of his production comes after the catch, and he is only averaging 2.6 yards after catch per reception. Add in a 7.1% drop rate, and yeah, there is some real risk baked into this profile. This is not a guy who's going to turn a short screen into a house call. He wins downfield, or he does not win much at all. And the competition piece is what worries me the most. Right now, you've got Dyami Brown, Van Jefferson, and Treylon Burks all fighting for that WR2 or WR3 role heading into camp. Adding a fourth name into that mix is not a problem on its own. Competition at every position is usually a good thing for a roster. But if you are spending real draft capital to bring in Kayshon Boutte, you are usually doing that because you expect him to make the 53-man roster. Not just show up and compete for a spot like an undrafted rookie would. And if that is the plan, it kind of tells you one of those other three guys is probably already on the way out the door before camp even opens. That changes the whole picture, right? Because now this is not just about adding competition, it is about who is actually getting phased out to make room for him. And that is not a small detail. That is basically the whole ballgame when you were talking about trading for a guy at a position that is already crowded. But look, here is why I still think this could work in Washington's favor. His yards per target sits at 9.58, which is really strong for a guy with that kind of deep target profile. That number tells you when he does get the ball, he is making it count. Over 11% of his catches have gone for touchdowns, and nearly 68% of his catches have moved the sticks for a first down. He has also drawn 7 pass interference penalties, which comes out to roughly 1 for every 17 targets. So even with the limitations, this is a guy who produces when his number gets called, and he draws flags that flip field position even when the ball does not come his way. And realistically, nobody is asking him to be the number one option here. Terry McLaurin is the guy. Chigokaku is probably your second option more often than not. Kayshon Boutte and Antonio Williams would be fighting it out for that third and fourth role behind them. Used that way, as a complementary deep threat instead of a featured piece, I honestly think this fit works really well for both sides. You are not asking him to carry an offense. You are asking him to do one thing at an extremely high level, and that is exactly the role he has already shown he can handle. Now, if Washington wants to make this trade cleaner on both ends, there might be a bigger piece to move alongside the picks, Treylon Burks. Think about it. New England's head coach Mike Vrabel was the head coach in Tennessee when the Titans traded away A.J. Brown and then drafted Treylon Burks to replace him. That saga is still one of the most talked about draft day moments in recent memory. So, there is already a real relationship there between that staff and that player, and it is not a stretch to think they would view getting Treylon Burks back, even for a fifth-round return, as a low-risk win. And imagine that storyline, A.J. Brown and Treylon Burks on the same roster again, playing for the same coach tied to both of their beginnings back in 2022. So here is how I would structure it. Washington sends over Treylon Burks and a conditional 2027 7th-round pick, one that only kicks in if Kayshon Boutte hits certain playing time numbers or signs an extension. In return, Washington gets Kayshon Boutte. New England gets a familiar face with untapped potential plus a future asset, and Washington adds a true vertical weapon without giving up much at all. And here is the best part for Adam Peters. This does not lock him into keeping Boutte if Dyami Brown or Van Jefferson outplay him in camp. If it does not work out, Washington has not given up real premium draft capital, just a guy who probably was not making the roster anyway. Now here's where I land on this. If Adam Peters decides none of Dyami, Van, or Treylon are truly that missing piece next to Terry McLaurin and Antonio Williams, then bringing in Kayshon Boutte makes sense. It is low risk, it has real upside thanks to that LSU connection with Jayden Daniels, and it fills a role this offense needs. Is he perfect? No. His route tree is limited and the drop rate is worth watching. But used right, as a true field stretcher and third or fourth option, this could be one of the smarter, quieter additions Washington makes this offseason. And that is exactly why Adam Peters may have already found the perfect weapon for Jayden Daniels.